Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. We have a very important discussion ahead of us, especially given the incredible breaking developments which have led us, I believe, the closest we have ever been to thermonuclear war on two fronts in both Palestine and in Ukraine. And we wanted to unite the entire peace movement around the world above ideologies, above people's differences. There's all these various reasons why people don't like one another. But if we're actually going to accomplish true peace on the planet, we have to unite everyone under one umbrella in order to accomplish this. So we wanted to have this meeting today on the anniversary of the day of the Nagasaki atomic bombing, to remember and commemorate those who died in this crime against humanity, that this should never happen again. We have people in official layers of government, not just in the United States, but around the world, who are actually talking about using nuclear weapons. And this should never, ever be a thought to happen ever again. Human beings were obliterated and annihilated out of existence. They no longer exist. That is what a nuclear war means. This is not just a war on the ground where people die and you have casualties. This is the lack of existence of human beings, and they no longer remain on this planet. So we do not ever want to see that happen again. We thank all of you for joining us. We have nearly 300 people on the line right now. If you have any friends or organizations you'd like to invite, please bring them on now. I put the agenda in the chat so you can see the lineup for today. And I think to get us started, we'll start with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the founder of the International Peace Coalition. And it's my pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, and hello to all of you. Well, as you just said, today is the anniversary of the Nagasaki catastrophe, and it is more urgent than ever before that people indeed remind themselves, and unfortunately, many, many people have completely gotten that out of their mind, what the use of nuclear weapon is doing. And unfortunately, we are very close of the two major crises going out of control simultaneously. Let me start with the situation around Ukraine, where on the one side, there were some hopeful signs that, maybe a dialogue solution can be found. There was the very important journey of Prime Minister Orban of Hungary. There were signs that Zelensky would be willing to talk to Russia, but that doesn't that's not the whole picture, because on Sunday, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Ryabkov, made an unusually stern warning by saying that the era of unilateral concessions from the side of Russia is over, that the situation has deteriorated in such a way that there are no more circuit breakers. And as if to prove that, 2 days later, the invasion at Kursk, at the Kursk region inside Russia, occurred with Ukrainian troops, about 1,000 elite troops, armored vehicles, tanks. And it now is very clear that this could not have been done without support from NATO, from the United States, giving them intelligence that this was obviously a weak spot in the border defense of Russia. Why is the Ukrainian elite troops, and we heard subsequently from various analysts that these troops is an elite brigade trained on NATO standard, having NATO standard equipment. while at the same time, the casualties in the other contested regions in the Donbass are horrendous. Latest figures are that, in the last 2 months, 120,000 Ukrainian troops were killed, basically because they're poorly trained. They just have a couple of days training and then they're being sent to the front. Naturally, this doesn't last long. So with a casualty rate of 60,000 a month, why is Ukraine then deploying this elite troops to the Kursk region? Now, obviously, there are all kinds of narratives now that this is just to get territorial negotiation material for future settlements. Well, I don't think that is really the official story, because we have seen step by step how the provocations are being escalated. And, now the latest, according to various American press outlets, is that, ATACMS should be used there. Now, Russia has called a federal emergency, and basically, obviously the casualties which have been inflicted on these elite troops are significant. The latest figure was 940. Well, if there are only 1,000 troops to begin with, then the question is how many of them are left. In any case, this is an extremely dangerous escalation. And if you look now at the second crisis spot, the whole world is still waiting. Is Iran going to retaliate against the two assassinations? There have been several days now where, obviously, supposedly the United States is talking to everybody to prevent a wider war. For sure, there was the deployment of the former defense minister and now national security advisor, Shoigu, to Tehran, delivering a letter from Putin to the new president of Iran, urging him not to go into a massive strike and offering Putin, that he would mediate between Iran and Israel. At the same time, the head of the U.S. Southern Command, Kurilla, was in Tel Aviv. So this also demonstrates this is not just a wider regional war, which could involve all, Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Turkey, Syria, the Kurds. But given the fact that, the Russians have deployed S-400 air missile defense systems, which, according to Colonel McGregor, does very likely mean that also Russian technicians are on the ground in Tehran. That China has a vested interest not to allow any major attack on Iran. It shows you that we are sitting on a complete powder keg, which potentially could involve the big nuclear powers. And the situation in Israel obviously is hard to describe, at least for a German. And I beg your sympathy. Others may help to describe the situation. I mean, the fact that Minister Smotrich publicly said the best would be to starve the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza to death. There was no public outcry by the international community about such a proposition, shows you what the state of affairs is. Now that brings me to the other element in the situation, and that is, that the whole diplomacy, everything has gotten completely out of control. Ryabkov, in his statement, basically referred to, an appeal that the United States should refrain from any assassination attempts against Putin or any other leaders. And there was this article in Foreign Policy magazine with the headline, "Should the United States assassinate President Putin or not?" And then followed a description of all the regime change, or a lot of regime change operations by the United States, and then going through a very detailed description about the personnel in the environment of Putin who could be involved in such an assassination. I find this the complete breach of all order of diplomatic relations among nations, which again should get people to really get upset. and not just, this goes along obviously with it's hard to say wartime or pre-wartime kind of control of the narrative. There was the raid by the FBI on the home of Scott Ritter 2-3 days ago, accusing him of having violated the Foreign Relation Registration Act, which, Scott Ritter, who is one of the most powerful critics of the present US policies, is referring to the First Amendment and his right as a journalist to do his work. Now, that is a sign of the time that there is obviously an effort to suppress any kind of discussion. What are the implications of these policies? Then similar Tulsi Gabbard, who after all was a congresswoman, a presidential candidate, and still has a US Army ID, she was surveyed by US intelligence as a terrorist threat on her flights. There are similar efforts going on in various European countries where there is a very clear effort to completely muscle any criticism of these policies. And, that is what, we know from history what happens when there is either a war about to break out or already in motion. So I don't want to go through more elements of the strategic situation. I think what I said so far, makes it more urgent than ever that we really unify the international peace movement in ways it has not yet been done, even if the IPC has made tremendous progress in the years since we are doing this. But I think we absolutely urgently have to have a new paradigm in the thinking. What I have said from the beginning of the special military operation, we have to overcome geopolitics, because as long as we define, in the case of NATO, Russia and China as the existential threat, we are in a dynamic which sooner or later will end in a catastrophe of the annihilation of the human species. And we have to find a new paradigm where we replace geopolitical confrontation with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, with the UN Charter, with the principle of dialogue, that we are the intelligent species who can settle any conflict through diplomacy and dialogue. And that is why I think we need to have a new international security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. And that is why I have called for the creation of a Council of Reason, of wise people stepping forward from every country to discuss what are the policy options for mankind to get in a more human domain. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. So I'm pleased to have on retired Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He's a retired United States Army colonel and the former chief of staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. Thank you so much for joining us, Colonel Wilkerson.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, I guess that's the right word, to be here with such a distinguished forum today and on such a day as today. I think, Anastasia, you and Helga have covered the granular situations we confront today quite well. I want to kind of take it up a little bit, and I want to talk about what I think is the principal existential threat in the world today. And I want to talk a little bit about, I think, how we got here and how we could get out of it. In these times of insane overseas wars, which Helga enumerated quite well, sponsored and supported to the hilt by America, of a troubled U.S. domestic scene not rivaled since 1860, of extremely poor leadership from all 3 branches of our government, I think it behooves us to stop a moment and take some stock. Indeed, it might be our very existence that is at stake, as both the 2 previous speakers have hinted at, and Helga did more than hint at. The sweep of human empires is well recorded for at least 3,000 years, and at least in sketches for about 2,000 more. In that sweep of time, minimal in a geological sense, after all, humans have been here, we think, for 300,000 years, and appreciably so for at least 50,000 years. But in that sweep of some 5,000 years, hundreds of empires, hundreds of them, large and small, have come and gone. And that's an important point. All of them are gone, vanished, disappeared, save the most recent one, the American. In historical terms, a very young one, arguably 1945 to the present day, or roughly 75 years. All previous empires, the mighty Mongol, the even mightier Mughal, the Eastern and Western Roman, the Persian, the Muslim, the British, upon which it was said the sun never set, the Soviet, and hundreds of lesser ones are gone, vanished like smoke. All had their day in the sun as well as the darkness of their collapse in many cases. Some went out on fairly gradual glide slopes like the British, others catastrophically like the militarily forged empire of the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler. But all of those many previous empires, among them, none, zero, nada, had developed the technology to destroy both themselves and the rest of humanity. None of them. Yes, many had priests and prophets who conjured the wrath of their various divine providences, conjured it to predict the utter destruction of the empire in which they preached and prophesied. But like all such religious or quasi-religious prognostication, their various deities never seemed to have the power to do much more than aid their political powers to strengthen their hold on the masses, until came the American Empire. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, a phrase sometimes attributed to Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atom bomb, which of course came from Vishnu of the Bhagavad Gita. Apocryphal or not, with regard to Oppenheimer, the words sum quite well what the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer had accomplished, and what we live with and perhaps will die with today. A single ballistic missile submarine carries sufficient weapons to destroy the world as we know it. A single submarine. If the blast and resultant radiation did not complete the job, the induced nuclear winter would. Saints forbid we even contemplate a nuclear exchange where all or nearly all of the thousands upon thousands of nuclear weapons, 10,000 in 2 countries, are employed among the now 9 nuclear weapon states, ranging from the huge stockpiles, those 2 countries, the United States and Russia, to the small but lethal one of North Korea. And what has your country, America, my country, America, done in the past 22 years to multiply tenfold the dangers of such an exchange of weapons? Not even talking about the instantaneous problems we have right now in the Middle East and in Ukraine, the heart of Europe. We, America, have almost single-handedly destroyed every one of the treaty regimes, from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty to the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, a very important treaty, very applicable to Ukraine, to New START, that gave at least a tentative precarious balance and restraint to this horrific and now proliferated creation of the American empire, nuclear weapons. I repeat, no empire in all of human history ever developed the means to eliminate itself and the human race. None, until America. Oh, of course, others would have done so in time, no doubt, but that hardly erases the reality that we did it. In fact, we did it. Worse, there is no way even to ameliorate the clear fact that we now are responsible for eliminating all the nuclear weapons treaties. So where does that leave us? As I began my remarks, it leaves us in the most dangerous world imperial power has ever managed to create, bar none. Far worse, it leaves us there with the principal imperial power in the world, America, sponsoring horrific and pointless wars, a country bereft of leadership and lacking domestic tranquility and even basic common sense. That's where we are today. It would be the subject of an exquisite Shakespearean comedy or maybe tragedy, if not so existentially serious. Now, after hearing my dismal picture of the situation with regard to these deadly weapons, I probably should stop and offer some hope. It's difficult for me to do because I have been exposed, personally exposed, to the stupidity of Washington's leadership in a way that stays with me and will be with me until I enter the grave. The George W. Bush administration was ripe with the problems I have only just now generally and briefly described. But in the name of optimism, I'll offer some hope, I hope, myself. The answer is democracy. That weary, heavily fatigued, much embattled concept of government our founders so relished and cherished, no matter how in the beginning they might have contaminated it with slavery and landed gentry. The people of this country must object to their imminent suicide. The people must object and object and object and protest and protest and vote lousy leaders into the streets, breed and elect new leaders to take their place, and then protest some more. They must reject cultish political movements for what they are, no different in their modern ways from the dismal prophets of old, who at the day's end were doing nothing but reinforcing the imperial writ and had their billionaires too. We must find decent, caring men and women to substitute for the useful idiots, Bibi Netanyahu's phrase. The only useful idiots were sitting in front of him in the United States Congress. And they're useful to the empire's most disgusting, devious, and dangerous motives and actions. Men like Lindsey Graham and women like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And we must replace them with far better people. Mark Twain once said in a moment of humor, which he was wont to, there's really no distinctly American criminal class, save the U.S. Congress. Twain would double down, maybe triple down on that remark today. We must campaign for change and campaign constantly and directly in the ugly face of empire. And we must work diligently in every way possible on every level in the empire's home, here in the so-called land of the free, to change the trajectory of empire, even to end the empire on as gentle and little damaging a glide slope as possible, if we can. We must end these stupid, endless wars, each one of which has the potential to expand to the use of nuclear weapons. As just been said, we have military officers in our armed forces now discussing, as they did in the early 50s when they didn't know any better, they're discussing the utility of nuclear weapons. But one way to do so in spades is to agitate constantly for the reduction of the incredible 700 to 800 overseas bases of this empire, which enable and even in some ways start these wars. We sprawl all over the earth. The British never could hold a candle to us. And it's contaminating the very fabric of our nation to be out there in such a way. Another vital effort, as I have suggested, I hope by my remarks, must be to agitate strongly for new nuclear treaty regimes, and this time with all the nuclear weapon states included, meaning that world pariah state, the one engaged in genocide in Gaza today, Israel. They must be brought kicking and screaming into the new nuclear weapons regime. I hope you get the picture. We, all of us who care, and we're many, need to reclaim our republic and our democracy and end our damn empire, and swiftly, not slowly. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, for that very passionate discussion on what's happening right now. And coming from you, this has incredible weight. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is also my joy to bring on former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who served as the United States Congressman for Ohio's 10th Congressional District from 1997 to 2013. He was also the mayor of Cleveland from 77 to 79. And in 69, he was elected to the Cleveland City Council at the age of 23. So if you think that you're too old to join politics and get active, just think about someone like this who was 23 years old, who jumped in the fray. He was also a candidate for the presidency of the United States in 2004 and 2008. And my God, would it be wonderful if he had actually been president, I believe. He's a staunch opponent of the Iraq War of 2003, and he's presently an independent congressional candidate for Congress right now in Ohio. His career is a very definition of a lifetime of public service, and I am honored to have you on today, Mr. Dennis Kucinich. Thank you for joining us.
First of all, I want to thank the two previous speakers for their eloquent statement on the state of affairs. Having worked inside of the government for many years, I can certainly attest to the observations of Colonel Wilkerson and thank him for his service to the country and for his true patriotism. And also thank Madame LaRouche for her very sharp, poignant insights into the current situation. We all know, and that's why we're on this call, we all know that we're on the cusp of World War III. And in some ways, World War III is already happening on the installment plan. We have the extraordinary event of a genocide occurring in Gaza with the participation of the United States of America should send a warning signal to everyone about the inconscient forces that are moving not only in the Middle East, but throughout the world in support of continuous war. This is not without historical parallel. The brilliant historian Barbara Tuchman, in her book, The March of Folly, identified how throughout history, governments had made worse the better reason and made choices that destroyed their nations and in some case had a profound impact on civilization itself. We are at such a moment again. The thought forms that bring us war have overwhelmed common sense. The policies that bring us war are enriching an elite class that is able to justify in the most wicked terms their designs in order to keep the profits rolling in. The one thing I know from 16 years in Congress is an affirmation of General Smedley Butler's statement that war is a racket, because every war that I've seen since I was in the House of Representatives beginning in 1997 was based on lies, and that the lies are instrumental in not only trying to seize power and resources, but also in building profit. We are in a dark period here of humanity, but we still have what rests within each of us, this inner light that connects with what we could call the primal human sympathies, as the poet Wordsworth described in Intimations of Immortality. The primal human sympathies that connect us each to each and cause us to be aware of our common humanity. And this is something that this call is important for, because it's a reaffirmation of the common humanity which we hold across the world in the cause of peace. Not the peace of the grave, but peace that enables each person on the planet to live out their own individual destiny or collective destiny with their family and the people of their community. We are now at a crisis point where, as was stated in the introduction to this call, we could be facing a nuclear war. There are those who talk about nuclear weapons as though it's no big deal. They talk about nuclear weapons that have a, quote, limited, unquote, effect. When I was in Congress, the last time, I cautioned about the use of so-called nuclear bunker busters against Iran and pointed out how any kind of nuclear weapon, low yield, as they call it, would create nuclear fallout that would spread thousands of miles and would poison millions of people. The fact that we are still talking about nations using nuclear weapons shows how deracinated the moment is. The fact that the media goes along with the most stupid, inane discussions about policies in the brickbat of a Punch and Judy show instead of really deep analysis of the moment where we're at shows the danger we're in. The fact that journalists who try to do the right thing and report exactly what's going on are held to obloquy, that they're attacked, that they're raided, shows the danger moment that we're in. We have to, this is really a moment for a cri de coeur, a cry of the heart, to say, look, we're not going to stand for this anymore. This government must stop in its, our government, the United States, where I'm speaking from, must stop in its endless preoccupation with war. Over $1 trillion a year goes for war or preparation for war right now. More than half of our budget that is, you know, supposed to be for protecting the Americans' everyday lives are now going for this idea that somehow America is still the unipolar ruler of the world. And frankly, that idea has long been gone. And if we don't recognize that we are in a world where there's power for all, or power, you know, we lose the opportunity to merge into that common humanity as a friend instead of as a war machine. So I'm, you know, as someone who served inside the government for so many years, and who is aware of the base corruption of our society that continued militarism has brought. You know, I today join with you in this call for ceasefires everywhere, for people to lay down their arms, for a reawakening of the spirit of turning swords into plowshares, for an understanding that we have a common destiny. And if our destiny is to become part of nuclear rubble, then those of us who object to that, as we do today, need to be heard from. And I object to it. And I know that future generations are depending right now on all of us to be able to be heard from. And how are we heard from? We're heard from in governments by being candidates and being elected to office. We're heard from organizing in town squares and bringing people together to cite the moment. We're heard from using whatever tools we have on the internet to communicate and arouse the people, to let them know of the challenge of the moment. And we're here through our commonalities, merging and creating a new consciousness that hopefully will be able to overtake this this very sordid dance with death. So thanks to all of you for what you do. I'm sorry that the video part of my presentation isn't working, but I'm hopeful that that this conference is the beginning of many new efforts percolating all over the world for peace, for justice, and for humanity and the continuation of life on our planet. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dennis Kucinich, for joining us. That was a very beautiful statement, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think this is the kernel of the leadership on the planet of people who actually are set out to do what you were discussing. I'd like to ask Mrs. LaRouche if you'd like to respond to any of the speakers so far.
Well, I just want to thank both Colonel Wilkerson and Mr. Kucinich for what you said, because it confirms what my deepest belief is, namely what Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz said, that the universe is made in such a way that every evil causes an even greater good to emerge. And I think what you both said is what is giving hope to the rest of the world that America can be saved. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we shall continue. This has been an excellent lineup so far, and we're going to continue with Dr. Gershon Baskin. I apologize if I'm destroying your name, but he is an Israeli peace activist and negotiator. I have nothing but admiration for your incredible bravery for what you're doing. I know just from reports from different people I've spoken to that many people like yourself are under grave prosecution and persecution in Israel for calling for peace. And I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Anastasia, and thank you, everyone. Good evening from Jerusalem. While this talk has been looking at the global picture from the macro picture of the insecurity that we all live, I'm going to bring us down to the micro level of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the conflict between Israel and Hamas. From the outset, I want to state categorically that there is not now, nor has there ever been, a military solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is not now, nor has there ever been, a military solution to the problem of Hamas or other organizations that are called resistance organizations or terrorist organizations or whatever you want to call them throughout the region. We have a political conflict which needs to be resolved politically and diplomatically, and the military solutions that are employed by our failed leaders only complicate the situation more and create tragedies and traumas that we're all living. And this is important to recognize that we are dealing with two extremely traumatized societies today. For Israeli Jews, on October 7th of last year, more Jews were killed in one place at one time by the Hamas atrocities than at any time since the Holocaust. And Israeli society hasn't gone beyond October 7th. We are still on October 7th, reliving that day every single day. It's reinforced in our media, the stories that are being told and the recollections of the horror and terror that people felt on October 7th. And since October 7th, the Palestinian people in Gaza, and Palestinian people anywhere in Palestine or around the world, are living the trauma that they all experienced as a nation in 1948 that they call the Nakba, the catastrophe of their exile. There are more than 2 million homeless people in Gaza today who have been uprooted from their homes. Most of them have been destroyed, demolished by Israel. Much of the Gaza Strip, some 90%, it's estimated, has been demolished by Israel. Probably around 50,000 people have been killed in Gaza over the last 10 months. The majority of them are non-combatants, women and children and elderly people who are now living in tents or on the street. There are tens of thousands of new orphans in Gaza who are facing the world without any family to support them. This is a human tragedy that we are seeing before our eyes, with two populations that are incapable at this point of thinking logically, coherently about a future that might involve peace. If there had been a peace movement in the past in Israel and in Palestine, it's difficult to find it today while these two peoples are living in the trauma. We are not post-trauma. We are still living in the trauma for 10 months. As the war goes on, as the suffering goes on, and one thing is quite clear: the longer that Israel remains in Gaza, the more there will be armed insurgency against Israel, and Israeli soldiers will come home dead. The more that Hamas will have recruits from homeless Palestinians and youth who have no future before them except fighting Israel's continued occupation and aggression. And this has to end. We had a breakthrough perhaps just last night with the announcement by the President of the United States and the Emir of Qatar and the President of Egypt, calling on Israel and Hamas to return to negotiations, stating for the first time that these three countries that are mediating this dispute have bridging proposals that they would put down on the table. And it seems that as we are on the cusp of a much wider war in Israel, waiting for a retaliation by Iran and by Hezbollah for assassinations that Israel committed just last week, we saw a rapid Israeli response to the announcement last night by the three mediators that it will send on the 15th of the month the negotiating team, the top negotiators from Israel, to return. And I assume that Hamas will be there as well to continue these negotiations and to seek a ceasefire. We must have a ceasefire for this war. It must be a ceasefire which is sustainable. The agreement or the proposal that was called the Netanyahu proposal, which it wasn't, that was presented by President Biden in May, includes three phases that will take months before we see the end of the war. And there's no reason for it to last so long. This whole thing can end in a matter of weeks, and it requires Israel to withdraw from Gaza. It requires Hamas to release the 115 remaining Israeli hostages, the majority of them civilians. The majority of them are believed to be no longer alive. They include women and children and elderly people and sick and wounded. They must be freed and sent home. Israel will release Palestinian prisoners in exchange for this deal. There must be a hermetic sealing of the Gaza-Egypt border because that's where Hamas got its weapons and its arms from over the last years and was able to build this enormous arsenal that's been used against Israel since October 7th. There needs to be peacekeepers sent to Gaza who will protect the Gazan people from Israeli aggression and protect Israelis from Hamas aggression, which means that the Palestinians need to shake up their leadership. They need new leaders. We in Israel must get rid of our irresponsible, failed leadership that's been governing us for too long. Prime Minister Netanyahu is the longest-serving prime minister in the history of Israel, and he is directly responsible for everything that led to October 7th. Let's face it, 56 years of occupation of the Palestinian people in the territories that were occupied by Israel in 1967 cannot go on. The Palestinian people must understand that they won't have freedom and liberation and dignity if Israel doesn't have security. And the Israeli people must understand that they will never have security as long as they occupy the Palestinian people and deny them their freedom and liberation and dignity. Everyone here needs security, Israelis and Palestinians. Security is not going to be provided by this war or any war in the future. This is the worst Israeli-Palestinian war. Jews and Arabs have been killing each other for over 100 years on this land, and this must be the last war. In order for that to happen, the United States needs to stop arming Israel to continue to fight this war. There are now US and UK warships on the coast of Israel and Lebanon. They're there in a defensive mode to protect Israel if once again, like on April 14th, Israel is shot by hundreds, maybe thousands of rockets from Iran and drones and missiles coming from Lebanon as well. But the United States must tell Israel that it will not arm Israel anymore to fight a war of aggression, not in Gaza and not in anywhere else. There's a difference between providing Israel with the ability to defend itself when it is attacked and providing Israel with aggressive offensive weapons that it is using against our neighbors. There is a diplomatic solution to the conflict between Israel and Lebanon. There was Security Council Resolution 1701 in 2006. We need to revisit that resolution. The peacekeeping troops in Lebanon, UNIFIL, needs to be reinforced and reinvigorated. They must have a mandate that will prevent Hezbollah from digging in South Lebanon and threatening Israel. But we must not allow wars to be the solution for these border conflicts between countries. The Palestinian people deserve a new leadership that would represent them. They deserve to go elections. The last time they elected their leadership was in 2006, and today they have a 90-year-old leader in the West Bank who's serving the 18th year of a 4-year term, and he has zero legitimacy. And we have Hamas, who was elected in 2006 and never really confirmed and allowed to govern because it was not recognized by the international community in its refusal to recognize Israel or to adhere to policies of nonviolence. The Palestinian people need leadership. We need leadership. The world, as we've heard in this call, needs new leadership. It must be clear that the Israelis and the Palestinians are very unlikely to end it by themselves. We've been waiting for a long time for there to be a bilateral solution. What we saw in the evening of April 14th was the appearance of a regional defense alliance that helped Israel shoot down rockets and missiles and drones that were shot from Iran to Israel. And that defensive alliance rose overnight without negotiations and without agreements. And it gives us a lead to where the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be found. We need a regional solution that creates a new architecture in this region of the Middle East of peace and security and cross-boundary cooperation in dealing with climate change and the other issues that concern us, a non-nuclear Middle East. The solution is within the regional framework. We do not need, nor do we want, another Pax Americana. The United States have proven to be the worst mediators in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict ever. They are never the neutral, a mediator helping both sides reach an agreement. We know that the United States is always biased toward Israel and ends up putting pressure on the Palestinian and never helps us reach an agreement. But the solution to this conflict is in the region. We need regional agreements will be backed and supported by the United States and the European Union and the United Nations and other nations in the world. And that's where our hope is. And what we need to do is to put an end to this conflict so that it doesn't spill over into a world war and into a nuclear conflict. And thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Baskin, for joining us. I think this dialogue process amongst not just the parties involved, but on an international scale is incredibly important to have. And even if people do not agree about what we're talking about here, the importance of bringing people to the table to discuss things through is vitally important right now if we actually want to stop thermonuclear World War III. So I just want to emphasize that. And I thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Baskin.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask for Jack Gilroy, who is an incredible activist, longtime activist with Veterans for Peace. I believe you were one of the founding members of that organization, and also with Pax Christi, which is the peace arm, you could say, of the Catholic Church, and also ban killer drones, which I could not agree with you more about. So thank you so much for joining us, Jack.
Well, when you say the Catholic Church, I guess I have to say I'm a pre-Constantinian Catholic, right? After Constantine, that's when the Catholic Church began to support all those empires that Colonel Wilkerson was talking about and all of those terrible wars that we have endured. But that's another point. Yes, Veterans for Peace, for those people who don't know much about Veterans for Peace, it's a bit different from the other Veterans for Peace organizations. We don't believe in war. We believe that diplomacy out of a barrel of a gun is not the way to go. And consequently, we get to our people to try to have actions to get our people into the streets and hopefully get others as well. For example, we are very much in support of the students and their whole movement toward divestment, and they'll be back in the streets before too long. We are pointing to early September, the Veterans for Peace, for national, international actions. And we would like students, for example, to help us. And we will have students, by the way, with us on our national convention, which is this coming, August 16th, 17th, and 18th. On August 18th at noon, and I think in the chat, Anastasia has a link, Veterans for Peace will have a discussion on the very things you're discussing today. All of our speakers so far have talked about being on the cusp of war. nuclear war. So we are looking at ways in which we can get students to work with us. We will help them with their desire to push for divestment. And we're going to be asking students, and we'll have them with us too on that program noon on August 18th with the Veterans for Peace National Convention. We will be asking the students to help us deliver a letter that has been designed by internationally known attorneys. For example, attorney Terry Lodge of Ohio has been tremendous, especially dealing with resistors to nuclear energy and nuclear war, nuclear weapons, and Marjorie Cohn from the Jefferson School of Law in California, who also helped design this letter. First, the letter was designed for Department of State leaders. Some Department of State leaders have been resigning, saying, we're breaking the law. We're not going to be part of this. Our letter that will be delivered in September, starting in September, will be to war industries. And if you don't know the war industry in your area, just go on Google and use the word defense, which of course is a lie, but defense industries in my city, whether it's New York City or San Diego or Walla Walla, Washington. It's going to be there. You'll find them, and you'll be surprised as well to see the tremendous number of local industries that also collaborate with the bigger industries, such as General Dynamics or Lockheed or BAE Systems. We tried to deliver this letter on tax day, April 15th. We went to 3 of the real big ones. In Scranton, Genocide Joe's hometown, where the Army ammunition plant is controlled by General Dynamics, that produced the most wanted munition in both Ukraine and in Israel. That's the 155 millimeter. They produced the shells there. We tried to deliver the letter to the owners, or the CEO of General Dynamics, that will tell them that they are now aiding and abetting the breaking of law. There are 6 laws, 5 that are US laws, 1 international, actually several international laws, that indicate that when you send weapons to an entity, a nation, a state that is dealing with human rights violations, and what could be more evident than Israel, my God, the greatest human rights violator in our time. That is breaking the law. One example would be the Leahy law. Retired Senator Patrick Leahy, who stated that very clearly. And this is not just civil law. We're talking about criminal law. These individuals are responsible for criminal law. We moved from General Dynamics, which, by the way, Colonel Wilkerson and Dennis and everyone have been speaking about nuclear, companies. General Dynamics that's the biggest one, dealing with the submarine, the Trident submarines, or the new style electric subs that they're beginning to ship to sea. So yeah, General Dynamics, besides the 155s, they also, of course, are much behind nuclear weapons. Then we moved up to Lockheed Martin to try to deliver our letter there to Lockheed Martin. The best we could do was give it to a security guard, but we do send certified letters as well to the CEOs to back up attempting to do it in person. Lockheed Martin is also very big into nuclear weapons. Lockheed Martin, of course, makes the Hellfire missile just a few miles away from Disney World, and the Hellfire is blowing the hell out of Gaza and many other places around the world. We also, and they also, by the way, where we went, this Lockheed Martin corporation in Archbold, Pennsylvania, produces what is known as the Paveway bomb. They have Paveway 1s, Paveway 2s, 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs. They are doing devastating jobs, tearing apart bodies and destroying hospitals, destroying schools in Gaza. So we delivered the letter there, and then we went to BAE. Now, Helga knows, for example, the biggest manufacturer of weapons, of all weapons in Europe, is BAE Systems. Well, they happen to be in the United States as well. They rank in the top 10. I believe they're now number 5 or number 6. BAE, beyond dealing with nuclear weapons, also makes the howitzer at this plant where we were in Endicott, New York. And the howitzer is an artillery system to fire the 155s made down in Scranton. I tried to deliver the letter. I got as far as the door. They called the police. I was arrested. I was put on trial. I defended myself. And I believe what we did was to put BAE in the whole system. War is a racket, you know, as Dennis Kucinich was quoting Smedley Butler. War is a racket, and these are the racketeers, the CEOs and the others at BAE and Lockheed and all the rest. There's over 100 major companies in the United States. So people don't have a problem if they want to find out. Again, they just simply have to look at the so-called defense corporations in their own city or county. Now, what do you do with this letter? Well, you can get it, for example, by, it's in the chat. You can find that particular letter. Another letter will be coming out directed at the war industries in a few days. This will be available online as well. That letter can be delivered by students, by anyone. We will be appealing to Veterans for Peace chapters around the United States. We would hope that maybe some people in Europe would catch on as well, because Lockheed Martin is over there as well. Lockheed Martin has 390 plants around the world. It's insidious. It's pervasive everywhere that you'll find small companies and big companies in on the $1 trillion silencer. The $1 trillion silencer is, of course, what keeps people away from getting into the streets. And we're saying, let's get into the streets. We can do it. We'll join with students and hope that others will as well the first weekend in September. So check in the chat to find out more information. And thank you very much. I'm off to a Nagasaki event right now. So thanks for letting me have a word or two, Anastasia.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jack. And please send pictures of the event that you're at. I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you so much. I did include those links in the chat. People can pick those up as we go. Okay, next, we're going to go to Ray McGovern, who is, apologize here, who's a former CIA analyst and a co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professional for Sanity, and also Veterans for Peace. Thank you so much for joining us, Ray.
Thank you. Thank you, Anastasia. I'm unmuted. I just want to compliment the previous speakers. And I want to say that yesterday, Judge Napolitano asked me about Scott Ritter. And he said, do you think he has courage? And I said, I know he has courage. I've known Scott closely for the last 2 decades. We've worked together. And courage, as I recall from my scholastic studies, is the basis of all virtue. All other virtue is specious if you don't have any guts, okay? That's why I applaud people speaking out, as Colonel Wilkerson and Helga have already done. And we all need to do that kind of thing. Now, getting back to Scott, I can sympathize with Scott 20 years ago when my profession of an intelligence analyst was prostituted to justify a war against Iraq that was completely a lie, based on lies. There were no weapons of mass destruction or ties between Saddam Hussein and al-Qaeda. And I got really angry, okay? And so did Scott. And I got so angry that I couldn't shake it off. And luckily, I remembered some of my scholastic education. And I remembered Thomas Aquinas saying, don't worry, Ray. Anger is a virtue, okay? A virtue, yeah. He looked all around. He was writing about virtue. He was wrong about a lot of things, about women and, you know, all kinds of stuff. But he knew a lot about Aristotle, you know, about like, virtue. And he said, look, anger is a virtue. There's no word for it in Latin, so I can't really write about it, but the opposite is iracundia, always being ticked off. The other is kind of a milquetoasty, you know, timidity. Virtue lies in the middle, in media res, okay? And anger, the virtue of anger is just enough of what you need to be virtuous. Whoa, Now, he quoted John Chrysostom from the early church, that is, Aquinas did, and he said, look, anger is a virtue because it respicit bonum justitiae, because it looks at the good of justice, and if you can live and work without a feeling of justice, you are corrupt, you are sinful, okay? So what does this all have to do? It all has to do with what we, imitating Scott, and saying, you know, there is ample reason to be angry, but, you know, courage, as I said before, both Aristotle and Aquinas said, you know, is the basic of all virtue, and the rest of these virtues, including anger, are specious if you have no guts. Now, proceeding from the sublime to the prosaic is hardly the right word. Will Israel use a nuclear weapon in extremis? That's the key, folks, in my view. And my answer is it probably will. Whoa. Why do I say that sort of thing? Well, there's a military historian, military specialist who is well regarded in Israel and in the United States. As a matter of fact, his writings are right next to Sun Tzu and other big, who else? His writings are up there against Clausewitz and Sun Tzu, the rest of them. His name is Martin Van Crayfield, and more than 20 years ago, he said this. He wrote this, actually. Our armed forces, he's an Israeli citizen now, Jewish heritage. Our armed forces have the capability to take the world down with us. And I can assure you that will happen if Israel goes under. Whoa, okay. That was a long time ago. Does that still hold? Does the Samson option still reign supreme if the Israelis are in extremis? Well, I asked another well-regarded colonel, not Colonel Wilkerson, but another good friend of mine who knows a lot about this and was in contact with lots of Israeli officers. He said, look, several Israelis have said the same thing as Van Crayfield to me recently. They seem intent on killing everyone in the region with nuclear weapons if their bid to dominate the region fails. So, getting back to courage, will we be virtuous? Will we be appropriately angry? You know, will we practice the virtue of anger and put courage, the basis of all virtue, behind that, and do the kinds of things not only that Gilroy has just mentioned, but other things that we in our own circumstances, our own milieu, can do effectively? Well, of course we have to do that. And we can't let Scott Rutter stand out there uniquely as a person practicing the virtue of courage, and the rest of us just sit back and look on and say, well, gee, I wish we could do that. We can do that. We need to do that. We must do that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Ray. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us. Next, we will have Steve Leeper, who is and please correct me if I have your titles wrong, because there are many. He's the chairman of the Peace Culture Village, former chairman of the Hiroshima Peace Culture Foundation, and the former U.S. representative of Mayors for Peace. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve Leeper.
Thank you. I've lived about half my life in Japan, starting when I was 1, and we Japanese like to read our statements when we have a specified time, so I'm going to do that. I went to Hiroshima in 1984. Everything I know about peace and international politics, I learned by working for Mayors for Peace, which is the campaigning NGO of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What I learned by building Mayors for Peace from 500 city members to 5,500 cities is that 90% of mayors don't do anything unless someone with money or some group that controls lots of votes persuades them to do it. That's how I've come to believe that political leaders are not a useful target of peace activities. We need to address and raise grassroots global public consciousness. After the bombing of Hiroshima, Professor Ichiro Moritaki was in bed for 5 months, recovering from his injuries and thinking about the new weapon that had just flattened his entire city in 10 seconds. He ended up losing his right eye, but arrived at 2 major insights that strongly influenced the peace movement in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Japan. First, like many hibakusha, he realized almost immediately that the atomic bomb was not a threat just to Japan. It was a threat to humankind. So he declared that the deep meaning of the bomb is that human beings can no longer resolve our conflicts through contests of destructive power. All conflicts must be resolved through dialogue, negotiation, and the search for truth and solutions that benefit all parties. And Hiroshima has been saying that since 1947. His second insight was that we live in a civilization of power, and unless we graduate to a civilization of love, we will use our new weapons to kill ourselves. In other words, the atomic bomb terminated our ability to solve global problems through the pursuit of dominance in a social structure that makes life good for winners and bad for losers. To survive, we will have to build a society that seeks to make life good for everyone, including our plant and animal relatives, the soil, the water, the air, and the ecosystems that keep our planet habitable. This is known in Hiroshima as peace culture. I'm not going into detail on this because I assume everyone on this Zoom basically understands and agrees. The question is, how can we raise global public consciousness to the point where humanity as a whole rejects the current culture of violence and forcefully demands a culture of peace? Some say, and I agree, that global consciousness is evolving away from competition toward cooperation, but most of us are here today because we perceive an urgent crisis. The global power hierarchy is shifting. After centuries of dominance, the US and Europe are growing weaker, while China, Russia, and Asia are growing stronger. Even among chimpanzees and dogs, when the alpha male gets weak, the pack experiences an increase in violence. The last time the global human hierarchy shifted as dramatically as it's shifting today was when Germany, Italy, and Japan entered the competition for colonies. That competition led to World Wars I and II. In Hiroshima today, most people seem to feel we're still in the post-war period. I don't. I think World War III has already begun. If so, keeping this war from building to a nuclear climax has to be our top priority. Unfortunately, the forces for peace are not even in the game. Peace is extremely weak right now for a long list of reasons, but the decisive one is that we peace people are unwilling and or unable to cooperate. We compete. We compete for funds, we compete for fame, we compete for followers, we compete to have our ideas accepted, we compete for access to high-ranking diplomats and politicians, even though the diplomats and politicians we deal with today are symptoms, not the disease and certainly not the cure. We work in narrow silos based on the ideas, tactics, strategies, people, and organizations we like. We refuse to work with anyone we don't like or anyone who has offended us or whose ideas are different from our own. The war culture is based on competition, but warriors are far better at cooperating than we are because their cooperation is based on money and rank. Peace activists compete, but we are all leaders with very few followers, and we have no widely accepted process through which to pursue broad-based agreement and the resolution of internal conflict. We're great at letting 100 flowers bloom, but we're not good at getting any of our flowers noticed by the global public. I could go today to a department store in Hiroshima and do a survey of shoppers, and I assure you that very few will even have heard of the TPNW. In fact, as soon as they detect that I want to talk about nuclear weapons, Most will avoid me like the plague. All of this has been prologue to two brief assertions or proposals. First, all the peace, environment, and social and economic justice activists in the world need to get together and cooperate to design, fund, and implement a massive PR campaign even bigger and more effective than the fabulous campaign run in the 1990s by the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. We need to spend $5 to $10 million a year for 2 or 3 years convincing the people of the world at the grassroots level that the war culture is obsolete, evil, and obscenely selfish and dangerous. People, not diplomats or mayors or even presidents, but people need to see that the competition between the US and China is a giant expenditure of time and money that humanity can't afford. We are all earthlings. We have to reject war completely, along with all leaders who promote war and the military. We should elect and follow leaders who are committed to and capable of discussing, researching, and at times arguing in a civilized, well-mediated, truth-seeking manner about how to keep Earth habitable. We need leaders who understand that selfish competition for hegemony, dominance, power, and wealth is destroying our society and our life support systems. But humanity will follow leaders like that only when the majority of us understand that violent competition with the weapons we have is stupid to the point of being potentially fatal to all of us. My second point is that the campaign for peace, culture, and human survival must start with abolishing nuclear weapons. Studying Shorinji Kempo, I was taught that when fighting a larger, stronger opponent, you have to hit him in a vulnerable pressure point. The most vulnerable pressure point on the body of the military-industrial complex is nuclear weapons. No one, not even the people making tons of money from them, actually wants a nuclear war. If they did, we would already have had one. Everyone in the war business knows that a nuclear war would be the end of civilization and very probably the extinction of Homo sapiens. Again, this is not a hard case to make, but we are not making it loudly or efficiently enough to get public attention. Nuclear weapons are the easiest global problem we face. 9 nations could solve this problem in a week if they wanted to, but only a dramatic shift in public consciousness will make them want to. To graduate to a peace culture, we will have to raise global public consciousness in myriad ways, but if we're unwilling or unable even to lay down our doomsday machines, what chance do we have of solving the far more difficult problems related to CO2, the petroleum age, class war, inequality, our population, dwindling resources, radiation and other toxic pollution, plastic in everything, epidemics, and AI? All of these problems will require unprecedented cooperation, which is simply impossible as long as we're fighting for dominance and threatening to blow the planet up rather than talk to the enemy. My main point is this: there are millions of things we need to do to make the world a safer, more comfortable, healthier, happier, and more sustainable place, but we will not do any of them if we can't get rid of nuclear weapons. On the other hand, if we do get rid of nuclear weapons, that one step will be the physical manifestation of humanity's willingness to cooperate for survival. That one step will open the door to all the other areas of cooperation we need to get into with urgency and with every bit of our collective will and wisdom. So I believe the top priority for the International Peace Coalition should be a massive campaign focused like a laser on the abolition of nuclear weapons. And we need to get started soon. The details are far beyond the scope of this talk, but the first step is to get all of us wanting to get together to do what needs to be done to have a powerful impact on global consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Leeper. And I couldn't agree with you more about what you said in the opening about the necessity of needing to bring together the entire peace movement into this process now. And it's not unified at this point. Yeah. Next, we will go to Professor Steve Starr, who is professor at University of Missouri and is an expert on nuclear war. Please go ahead, Professor.
I teach a class on nuclear weapons at the University of Missouri. And I thought if I explained what nuclear weapons would do, it might give some of the urgency that Mr. Leeper explained why we need to have. Since it's the anniversary of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki today, I thought I'd show some pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki before and after the bomb. This is Hiroshima, or was Hiroshima. This is a picture of a street in Nagasaki. This is a picture of the harbor of Nagasaki taken in the 1920s. There weren't a lot of photos of the city before the bomb went off. This was Hiroshima very shortly before the atomic bomb was detonated over it. This is the bomb that was detonated over Nagasaki. They tested one like it in the desert in New Mexico first, called the Trinity test. There's a few images here. The first one was taken from a distance of about 7 miles with a regular lens. Then there's a second image that they get progressively closer, but it gives you a little bit more of a feeling of what it was like. This image is centered at the base where the detonation took place. Well, this bomb had the explosive power of 15,000 tons. Well, actually, this was 20,000 tons of TNT. It's the equivalent of, but it's not really a good explanation of what a nuclear weapon is, because nuclear detonations create solar temperatures. Chemical high explosives create temperatures in the thousands of degrees, but nuclear detonations, whether it's an atomic bomb or a hydrogen bomb, a thermonuclear bomb, they create solar temperatures that are hundreds of millions of degrees at the moment of detonation. So this was the picture of the bomb after it was detonated over Nagasaki. It's probably, I expect this is about 10 or 12 miles away. This is what Nagasaki looked like after the bomb detonated. Probably the photos were taken, I'd say, 4 to 6 months afterwards. This is a picture of the firestorm that was created in Hiroshima after the atomic bomb was detonated. This is a picture of Hiroshima taken about 6 months after the detonation. There was about 3 to 5 square miles that were consumed in a firestorm. But if you're beneath the fireball, it would vaporize you. It would, melt steel, concrete. These are some of the images of, there weren't many images of people afterwards, but this is a group of survivors. This man's dying from radiation sickness. This was Nagasaki. Now, the atomic bomb, as I said, was 3 to 5 square miles for about 13 square kilometers. The firestorm was created. The strategic nuclear weapons that the United States and Russia have on launch-ready status are much larger than that. Russia has about 250 of these 800 kiloton warheads that are ready to launch within several minutes. On an average weather day, it'll create a fire zone that's 152 square miles. When the bomb, this is an image of the 800 kiloton detonation over New York City. Dr. Theodore Postel created this. The surface of the fireball is hotter than the surface of the sun. It's about 16,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that will ignite fires over a huge area, as we saw in the previous slide. The air temperatures in the fire zone quickly reach temperatures well above the boiling point of water, and everything in the zone will burn and create enormous amounts of soot and smoke. Now, there are larger weapons. Now, Russia's developed an unmanned submarine robot drone powered by a nuclear engine. It has almost unlimited range. It can go faster than U.S. torpedoes. And Dr. Postel also created these slides. This is at the bottom, you see the Tsar bomb. That was the largest nuclear weapon that was ever detonated. It was designed to be a 100 megaton weapon, but they put a lead jacket on it, and so it's 57 megatons. This is a submarine that carries these. It's called the Belgorod. You can see the holes in the front where the torpedoes would be released. There's 6 of them it can carry. And this is an image of the Tsar bomb that was detonated in Russia. I think this was probably taken from a distance of about 75 miles away. A bomb this size would ignite 6,500 square miles into a firestorm. These bombs are detonated in desert areas, so there were not firestorms that were created. 1961. These images show the relative fire zones. If you look at the very smallest blue dot on the left, it says 10 KT, that's 10 kiloton, a little bit smaller than Hiroshima bomb. This is a 100 megaton fire zone. Like I said, it's about 6,500 square miles. Dr. Postal created this image to show what would happen if 6 or 7 of these weapons were detonated on the east coast of the United States. Now, this is what our government's telling us about nuclear war. They create videos and PowerPoints that talk about the effects of a terrorist weapon that would be probably a few kilotons. So this is Los Alamos, where they're working to create a new plutonium pit factory. This was they created a simulation called the nuke-resistant city. So you can see how ludicrous this is in light of what I just showed you. This is the image of what would happen of a full-scale U.S.-Russian nuclear war. Somewhere between 150, 180 million tons of soot and smoke would quickly rise above cloud level into the stratosphere, and would form a global stratospheric smoke layer. In the northern hemisphere, about 70% of the light would be blocked, and southern hemisphere, about 35%. And the result would be what they call nuclear winter. In central North America and central Eurasia, the daily temperatures would fall below freezing every day for up to 3 years. And the cold weather would remain for a decade or so. It'd be too cold to grow crops, so most humans and land animals would starve to death. So that's why we need to prevent nuclear war. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Steve Starr. It's always appreciated you go through the absolute horror of what a nuclear war would look like and what that actually means for humanity. So thank you again for joining us. Next, we have actually a friend of mine, and we've had him on a number of times in the past. This is the director at Runaway Horses. He directed this amazing documentary called 815 Hiroshima, which we've shown here on this platform. And we've had a number of live showings, and it sounds like you've been able to get it on Amazon as well. This is H.R. Heffelfinger. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Heffelfinger.
Hi, good to see you again, Anastasia. So yeah, I want to thank the International Peace Coalition for inviting me to speak today, and all of our distinguished panelists. It's been, these calls are important, and this movement is important, and so thank you for having me participate. I know, and thank you for the past opportunities to connect with you guys and to share our work. So I'll just give a quick intro. My name is J.R. Heffelfinger, and I'm also a lecturer at the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications, and the director of 815 Hiroshima. And so my mission as an artist is to do 3 things: is to unveil the hidden truths about the human condition, amplify the voices of the voiceless, and to make the invisible visible. And so I feel like we've done that with this film. And so I wanted to, before we show you the trailer to the film, which plays really nicely from Steven Starr's presentation, It's a quote from John Hersey, which kind of served as the North Star for us when we made the film. And he had said, what has kept the world safe from the bomb since 1945 has not been deterrence in any sense of specific weapons, so much as it's been memory, the memory of what happened in Hiroshima. And so I think as time has passed and just looking at these black and white images, we forget, and it's easy to forget. And my aim with the film was to bring us onto the ground. So it's very not what Oppenheimer accomplished with its film. It's like an anti-Oppenheimer in some regards. So again, it is clear from this call and from the things that we are watching that we are that our very existence is at stake. The doomsday clock is certainly the closest it's ever been, and we are certainly on a march of folly. And so, with that, I would like to show you the trailer to 8:15. So, thank you for sharing that. So, the film 8:15 is about the horrors of nuclear war. It's about the resilience of the human condition and the power of love and forgiveness. So I invite you to watch the film. It's as Anastasia mentioned, it's available on Amazon in the United States and UK. We just finished an engagement with PBS for the past year, and it's a film that we don't have a great marketing budget, and we certainly don't have the same kind of marketing budget that an Oppenheimer had. And so it's important to kind of I invite you to watch it and share it with your friends and family. We've partnered with organizations like the Schiller Institute and Humanities for Peace, and certainly open to doing special screenings either virtually or in person. And so if you want to connect at any point to kind of use the film in some way to kind of support, bring people together and support conversation and dialogue, I certainly invite you to reach out to me directly. I'll share my information in the chat, and also the folks over at the Schiller Institute and Humanities for Peace and the IPC are certainly able to kind of connect you with me as well, and in our little team. So I just want to thank you for the work that you are all doing individually and as a collective. May the courage that we exhibit, and to quote the courage, the importance of courage that Ray McGovern was talking about, may the courage that we exhibit and the revolutionary acts of love and compassion that we express and reflect in our lives serve to raise our collective global consciousness. So with that, I just want to thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Heffelfinger, for joining us. Your friendship is greatly appreciated, and we definitely want to help you get this documentary out as much as possible. I've included those links in the chat where people can get it, can watch it. We would like to plan another live viewing someplace, getting people in a room and having a discussion around this
Absolutely.
incredibly important topic of ending nuclear war. And I believe your documentary is one of the best that I've ever seen in confronting the real issue of not just what this war is, but the forgiveness in which you need to, the love in which you need to possess in order to stop a nuclear war, the love for mankind. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
The first thing we want to start with, besides thanking everyone, of course, for what they had to say, is to first go to Helga, ask her for any comments on the entirety of what has happened. And if there are some remarks by any of the speakers, fine. Otherwise, we'll go directly to questions. So Helga?
Well, briefly, I think what Dr. Baskin was raising, I would like, to invite all of the participants of this call to look at our OASIS plan, because I think that the level of desperation in the region has reached such a point, and the pending danger of a generalized war, that we have to catapult this discussion on the level of a solution for everybody. And the OASIS plan, this is a proposal by my late husband. He made already in 1975, and we have actualized it in the meantime. It's an economic development perspective for the entire region, from actually India to the Mediterranean and the Caucasus to the Gulf states, based on the creation of massive amounts of new fresh water. and greening the deserts, creating agriculture, forestry, and basically turning this area of the world, which is mostly desert right now, into a blooming agriculture, gardening, forestry, and naturally infrastructure, cities, science, future for all the people. I would ask you, look at this material we have so far, and then if you agree, help us to build the next phase. We are planning several regional seminars of diplomats, of ambassadors who like the idea, but we have to catapult this into the general discussion for all of Southwest Asia. So if you want to contribute to this campaign, please get us to know your contact, and there's lots of things to do. Secondly, I wanted to say, on the proposal of Dr. Leeper about the two initiatives, I agree, we have to absolutely create such a mass awareness pending raising $5 to $10 million, which for us is not so easy as the other side. The other side is printing the money, and we have to somehow raise it very, painfully. But that is the whole idea of the International Peace Coalition, because when you are faced with the danger of nuclear extinction, that makes automatically every citizen of the world a world citizen, because if this is our one humanity, and we all have the right to speak out. So the idea is we have to unify all peace movement aspects all over the world and bring this message into every country, especially the global south, because if the nuclear war would happen, Nehru and Sukarno already said at the Bandung conference, maybe the countries of the global south will die a few weeks later, but they will die for sure shortly afterwards. So it is a matter of all of humanity. On the second point of your proposal, I think we have already in this conference represented the labor power and brain power that we can start to become much more effective. So again, I would call on participants in this call, or people who are represented in the different organizations who are participating, that we put together a task force, because I can easily imagine how we can put out a whole number of short videos on the danger of nuclear war using the material which Professor Starr presented and which Mr. Heffelfinger has shown us. And I think if we would really engage in a campaign, to produce such videos, I think the time is now ripe to raise a much bigger conscience, and as a stepping stone to the idea of banning nuclear weapons, which I think 50 countries of the world have already done, but naturally none of the nuclear powers have done so far, and that can only come from a public awareness. So lastly, I think I would only add to what Ray said about courage. I fully agree. On the anger, I would say anger is not a virtue. I think anger is very problematic. And I think a much more powerful emotion combined with courage is agape, is love. And I think if we want to get to the new paradigm, we have to get people to be better people, aesthetically educated. I mean, you can have anger, I mean, there's a difference. This goes now too far. I mean, the school of rhetorics in an Aristotelian tradition says you have to go on the stage and yell your anger out. But the humanist tradition which ended up in Lessing and Schiller, they basically said you have to educate your emotions, so that even if you are an actor going on the stage, you have to call forth your anger, but you don't feel it at this moment, or else it controls you. So it's the aesthetic education of men is, I think, the key to get us out of this barbarism. But this is a longer discussion. I just couldn't help to say it.
I think what we will do with those two eloquent last remarks, which make the obvious point, which is that what we have to do is we have to get this out further. There are millions and millions of people who need to be informed about this and organized, and we have to distill out of that the kind of people who can actually lead a council of reason, work along the lines that Helga has indicated, to turn this situation around while it is still possible to do so. So I'm now going to ask Helga for closing remarks, and we'll end the meeting on that note.
Well, I hope I can address at least some of the points raised. If not, we will for sure review it and address it next week. But I think that the difficulty is obviously that we have two exploding regional crises which have the potential to go global. Then we have, in addition, the kinds of problems which President Ramotha was mentioning in terms of the poverty levels, and there's a lot of things which, then sub-problems like, what happens with the Palestinians in Gaza right now who are being in danger of extincted. I think that there is one concept which I would like all the listeners and participants to reflect on. I think we are looking as a human civilization at an unprecedented crisis. I think, there were many dark ages in history, many empires which went under with great, damage to the people. But never, ever have we been in a crisis which is of such profound nature because of the existence of nuclear weapons, that if it goes wrong this time, there will be nothing left for all the reasons Professor Starr and others were saying. And that's why it is emphatically my view, and I think most people in the Schiller Institute and IPC, that you have to have a concept which addresses all the problems at the same time. Because if you're trying to solve only the Ukraine crisis, or only the Middle East crisis, or only this crisis or that crisis, the danger is that these other ones will come up behind your back and eat you up before you notice what has happened. And I think we have to address the systemic nature of what is causing all of these problems as a derivative. And that is why I think we have to really think about this new global security and development architecture, which should include every country on the planet. It should include Russia, China, the United States, Iran, North Korea, and all the other countries of the planet. And it has to be designed in such a way that each of the countries can say, my interest has been taken care of. Because I don't think that unless we come up with such an approach, it will be sufficient. Because it's like, when you have a cover on your bed which is too short, and you put it over your head to be warm there, then your feet get cold, and it doesn't work this way. This is why I have designed these 10 principles, which could be the starting point of such a architecture. And deliberately, these are not programmatic points. These are principles, and there is a huge difference between programmatic points and principle, because I have tried to come up with 10 principles which are sort of the foundation for all the other programmatic points to be coherent and to fall in line. And the first 7 of these principles address sort of the immediate changes in the world system, like sovereignty, overcoming world hunger, a new credit system, all of these things which I would urge you to read. But the last 3 principles I deliberately added as those which pertain to the method of thinking which is required in the new paradigm. And I can, for brevity reasons, only mention the last principle because it's also the most debated. And that is that I say that the new architecture has to proceed from the assumption that man is good by nature, and that therefore all evil is a lack of development, and can be overcome by more development, more perfection, more improvement of the soul and the mind, the aesthetic education. And in another place, I'm talking about the cohesion of the laws of the human creative mind and the laws of the physical universe. And that there is such a cohesion is easily to be proven, namely that something which is completely immaterial, namely a new idea, a scientific valid idea or an artistic valid idea, has an impact in the physical universe by enlarging the potential and the degrees of freedom in the physical universe. So there is a correspondence between an immaterial idea created by the mind and the impact this has on the physical universe. If such a coherence would not be there, it would not be efficient. You could have plenty of ideas, but they would have no impact on the physical universe. So I think we have to address this question in a very profound way, and in a certain sense, draw on the wisdom which humanity has produced in the different cultures up to the present development. And I have found that you find the answers needed if you do that kind of research. So I think that that is a very important conception. And I would like to invite people, that we should really discuss these matters deeply. And that also has something to do with the answer to the global resource limit, because, this global resource limit does not exist because it goes against the laws of the universe. The universe has, according to the James Webb telescope, we are aware of at least 2 trillion galaxies. And we have maybe explored a tiny fraction of our planet Earth, which is a tiny, tiny planet in, a galaxy which is too big to imagine, but just imagine 2 trillion galaxies. And then you get a sense that in terms of exploring the richness of the universe, we are only at the first baby steps. So we should not be pessimistic and say we have reached the end of things and the limit of all things. But it's actually an intellectual challenge, which I think is very exciting. And but that's a long discussion. In the meantime, I want to say that one of the members of the International Peace Coalition, who could not be here today for time reasons because he lives sort of on the other side of the earth in Asia, but this is Mr. Chandra Mustafa, who heads an organization called JUST. And he has just made a proposal, which I would like to also bring to your attention, which is the idea that if the UN Security Council is blocked because of, veto by one of the permanent members, and you cannot come to any conclusion, or if you come to a conclusion, then one of the members says this resolution is not binding, even if it is binding. So there is clearly a problem. And therefore, the proposal which Chandra has made is to shift the discussion to have a resolution of the situation in the Middle East to the UN General Assembly. There is a clause which is called Uniting for Peace, and that mechanism can be used if it is being adopted, I think, by a majority of the nations. So I would ask you, we will post all of this, and we would ask you to help us to distribute that to all the UN countries, all the embassies, consulates, and just make sure that there is pressure to do that. Because I think a general debate about the UN General Assembly to address all of the issues we addressed here today, I think that would be the gremium which could act in the short term to address the problems we discussed. So otherwise, I just would like to thank you all for having been part of this. I think we will make the video available for the most part. I would say we can agree to that. And then you could take that and take the passionate speeches. There were about 12 or so absolutely fantastic speeches, highlighting different aspects of the world crisis. And I think if we would, the 400 or 500 people who participated today, who many of them represent organizations with many members, but if you would get it out to as many organizations worldwide, and then bring as many of those to next week's meeting, and then we can really start to become a force which has to be counted on. So with that, I want to thank you and be courageous and be loving.